Absolutely. Thank you so much, Han. Welcome, everyone. Very pleased to be here today. Like Han said, I'm Rachel Dine. I'm the head of product and solutions marketing here at Chronosphere. I've been here about 2 years, and I am very pleased to have with me today my colleague, Karan Malhi, who will also be joining us. Karan, you want to say a quick hi?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I'm Karan Malhi. I'm a product manager at Chronosphere. I'm almost completing a year by the end of January, so very excited for this webinar.
Awesome. So let me walk you through the agenda for today. We're going to just start with an introduction to the survey that we did and help you understand the methodology, because what we're going to be diving into in this benchmark is going to be based on a lot of data. And I'm a data nerd. I think a lot of you on this call likely are. Karan is as well. So it's good to understand, like, how do we collect this data and what's the approach? The three main sections we're going to talk about are, first, the human impact of cloud native and how cloud native as a technology and architecture starts to impact teams and engineers. Then we're going to look at the challenges that companies are facing with their observability tooling, and especially as they adopt cloud native, how those challenges evolve. And then we're going to look at what the benefits are of the best-in-class observability. So the companies that are really leaning into observability and have implemented it really, really well, what kind of benefits and best practices do they get out of it? And then we'll leave time for wrap up, and of course your questions. So please put your questions into the Q&A as we go. So just to begin, like I mentioned, this data we're going to share today is based on a survey that we fielded with a neutral third party to 500 engineering professionals in the US. So we fielded the survey in late 2022 and then analyzed the data just in early 2023. Everyone who took the survey had some degree of familiarity with observability. And I wanted to just quickly share with you the demographics of the types of companies and the types of individuals who are answering the survey. Don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but just to show that it's from companies of all different sizes, from small, medium to large, and for people of different levels in the organization, from individual contributors, team leads, and managers and executives. So throughout the survey, we'll be showing a cohort across the entire organization. So rest assured, you and your peers are likely represented in this study. The other thing, too, that I wanted to talk about is cloud native as a baseline and cloud native adoption. So first of all, you joined a webinar called Cloud Native Observability Benchmark. So I'm assuming you have interest in cloud native and observability, but it's such an interesting term because a lot of people define it differently. So I wanted to just quickly level set and talk about how when I say cloud native, it's like about observability as well. But when I say cloud native, what do I mean? I use it as shorthand for microservices and containers, right? So it's distributed architecture, distributed applications, distributed infrastructure. It might be, a lot of people are using Kubernetes, but it doesn't have to be. It's containerized, it's serverless on the infrastructure side, and it's microservices on the application side. And I was really interested to see when we asked people what % of their environment was cloud native today and what they expected it to be in 12 months. The average amount of cloud native, like the average portion of the environment that was cloud native, was 46% today. And with companies expecting that to grow to 60% in 12 months. So clearly a lot of aggressive adoption of cloud native. The other thing too that I thought was very interesting was only 3% of companies said they had zero cloud native use today. So 97% of you on the phone today have cloud native in your organization, and it's growing really quickly. So I wanted to quickly ask you, Karan, what do you think is driving this rapid adoption of cloud native, like from your perspective and talking to our customers?
I think the biggest thing is efficiency, operational efficiency, having the ability to reduce the time to value, time to market. I mean, you have the same number of people. Now we've adopted these technologies to operate faster. And how do you combine those two things along with the processes to bring the product or ship product to the market faster? So that's the main thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, it's speed, time to market, time to value. Those are the biggest, and scale, of course, some of the biggest drivers. Great. So now that we've established, we know what cloud native is, we know why people are adopting it, we know that it is being adopted very, very quickly in the organization, in many organizations. Let's talk a little bit about the human impact. And so a lot of this is going to explore as we adopt cloud native and as we migrate more and more services or re-architect, or as more of our estate becomes cloud native, we've found that there's a lot of unintended impacts and unintended, I don't want to say consequences, because cloud native is obviously like, this is the future, this is where most organizations need to go, but we do need to watch out for what happens in the organization when we adopt cloud native. And one of the biggest impacts that we've seen is on people and the amount of time that they end up spending on low level tasks like troubleshooting. So one of the first things we found was that engineers are spending on average 10 hours a week troubleshooting, which is, if someone's working a 40-hour week, that's 25% of their time. But what's worse is that we believe that majority of this is actually unplanned troubleshooting. And Karan, I know you have a lot of opinions on the topic of unplanned interrupts.
Yeah, I mean, any interrupt-driven work has a much bigger impact than what we think it has. I mean, there are well-known studies which tell you that for every interrupt, if you're zoned in, you're working on something important and you get interrupted, it takes you like 20-25 minutes to get back into the same context. And people who work on troubleshooting generally don't have enough context. So when they get interrupted and get called in to help with troubleshooting, it's just much bigger impact. And the result is that people literally dread being on call. Like they're stressed out, they don't want to be on call, and they just end up wasting a lot of time of their main work, which they have to do, is to deliver product.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the impacts of being on call and troubleshooting, and actually we have a poll that we'd love to push to the audience now to ask a little bit about what you're seeing as the impacts of troubleshooting in your organization are. So this was something that we surveyed in our survey as well, and I'm very curious to hear what folks on this call feel as well. This is an anonymous poll, just to for interest, so please feel free to just jump in and pick a solution and vote. And while folks are taking a minute to vote, I will share what we found in the survey. So we asked respondents, what's the impact of spending so much time troubleshooting? What's the impact of spending 10 hours a week or more? 54% said they're frequently stressed out. That makes sense. 45% say they don't have time to innovate. So, they came to this role to do some, to solve tough problems, and instead they're stuck in the weeds, troubleshooting and triaging. And 29% want to quit. This is an extraordinary number. And I should note, I specifically looked at individual contributor engineers for this data cut. I'm assuming that most executives, most VPs and CTOs are not spending time troubleshooting. If they are, you might have other bigger organizational problems. But this was what we were seeing from the results. Almost a third said that they made them want to quit. This is a pretty depressing statistic. So hopefully you're taking a minute to vote right now. We'll leave the poll open another few seconds. Karan, did you have additional commentary on this you wanted to add?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is 43% say alerts don't give me enough context to understand and triage the issue. That's a big number, and that's a result of these microservices. The very things which make you go fast actually slow you down. And most of the alerts, they work for my team, but they not work for your team. For example, you're building a service, I'm dependent on the service. You've tested the alerts, or I've tested the alerts, and my team understands those, but do the rest of the teams understand those alerts? So we literally have to kind of treat other teams as customers of our teams. It's not enough for us collectively treating our external customers as customers. We have to treat each other as customers and make alerts and make those contexts available to each other.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You're jumping ahead a little bit into the next piece, which is how we're going to solve some of these challenges. But I completely agree in that, there's being on call is a necessary it's a necessary evil, right? But on call doesn't always need to be this painful. And thank you all for who voted in the poll. Interesting to see these results are similar to what we found in the survey. So half of you say teams are stressed out all the time. The next most common response was 34% said engineers can't work on what they want to work on, right? So they keep getting pulled into firefighting, and so they can't work on, the solving the tough, interesting problems. And then 28% say you're not meeting deadlines. So this all comes back to, speed and innovation and trying to move faster with cloud native. 25% of you say personal life is negatively impacted. So clearly there's something not right here. There's there's something broken. How are we going to move forward and start fixing this? Well, I'm going to bring you into a little bit more of the depths of despair before we have too many more solutions. But part of the reason that we believe engineers are spending so much time troubleshooting is that the alerts that they get don't provide enough context or don't have enough information to solve the issues, just as Karan was just saying. So, for example, 73% of IC engineers say that half the alerts they get from the observability team are not usable, and 43% say they don't get enough context. So if they're spending all this time troubleshooting and are in a fair amount of pain, I think of the observability workflow as really starting with, first you need to know there's a problem, then you can triage it, then you can remediate it and understand it. And if the very first step of that workflow of knowing there's a problem or getting an alert is just broken, the whole rest of the workflow is going to start to fail and start to take a lot longer. So I guess, Karan, help me understand a little bit more about this, about why alerts are not generally helpful. Like, what are some of the reasons you typically see?
So I think that one of the things we do all this work in building services and delivering services, and we do that fast. Do we spend enough time curating the information which is actually going to be useful when somebody else is on call? And the answer is no. Either we don't have enough time because of all the interrupt-driven work we have, or we don't think about that part of it. So having some sort of a curation of information which is actually going to be useful for people outside of my team. And that's what I said earlier, that treating other teams as customers of your services, just building APIs is not enough. Having that run in production and enabling other teams to actually go take care of your service when you're not around, that's the most important part. And one big part of that is providing context within the alert itself. And alerts are small, like you can't just cram in all the context in one place. So you got to find a place, like maybe spend more time curating dashboards, which have all the context in them. So it's just a process and a mind shift, like treat other teams as customers.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, that every team in an organization is a customer of every other team. Because I think we get so focused on our external customers, which obviously are the end goal that we need to serve, right? We need to delight our end customers. But in order to do that, we need to also serve our internal customers. And yeah, every team is a customer of every other team in a cloud native world. And I guess, what could you give me like another real world example of this that you've seen, Karan? Because I know you've with your background, you've seen this in practice as a product manager, in-house as well.
Yeah, so I owned a modern SaaS infra. I was productizing the internal tooling for internal engineers. One of the things we had to put in place was an incident response team. And the incident response team always had to, once anybody was on call, they invariably had to go hunt around who owned that service, what is that alert about. They had to go run around and find the SME for that service. All of that information, with a little bit of more preparation, could have been put in one place. The on-call process could have been better. In that case, like I said, it's a process and a mind shift, but that curation aspect of, am I actually prepared? Are my systems actually observable? And does everybody else have the context which they need to be on call? I think that's the part where we need to invest more time. And that's what didn't happen in my previous org.
Yep. No, that's a really Good, very relevant example. I'm sure many of you had that experience of hunting around trying to find the SME when something is on fire. It's definitely really fun. So that brings me to the next topic, which is top observability challenges. I hinted at this a minute ago, but we should probably also level set and define what is observability, because even more than cloud native, I think there's a huge amount of confusion and disparate definitions of observability, and everyone, I don't want to get into a religious war about the definition of it, but more maybe explain how I see it and how we see it at Chronosphere, so you have context when we talk about observability and the challenges. So generally we see it as, the process of first knowing that something has gone wrong or about to go wrong, or something is awry, right? Something is amiss. So you can then, and you need to know that something is wrong before a customer knows, before it impacts the customer, whether it's an internal or external customer, because then you need to go triage it, like figure out how bad is it, how many teams are impacted, how many customers are impacted. If this is like the middle of the night in an on-call situation, am I waking other people up, or can it wait till the morning? Like, what's the urgency? What's the priority? And from there, you want to jump into remediating or stopping the pain as quickly as possible. And then once you've remediated, you can take a step, take a beat, take a breath, go back and do root cause and truly understand why the issue happened, and make sure that it's resolved so it doesn't really truly fix, so it doesn't happen again. So this know, triage, understand workflow is really how we look at observability. It's powered by data like metrics, traces, logs, events, but those data points or those pieces of data don't in and of themselves truly give you observability. So when I think about observability in this context, it can be very challenging to implement in a cloud native world. And we'll talk about a little bit more of this in a second. But the first, actually, we'll talk about it right here. So when we asked in our survey if observability was more difficult when you adopt cloud native, 87% basically agreed. They said yes, right? When you're trying to do troubleshooting and discover issues and incidents and understand, go through that know, triage, understand life cycle, it's more complex in a cloud native world. This is not, if you're on the cloud native bandwagon, which 97% of you are, you've likely felt this, right? You felt that it's just, there's so many different interdependencies, many different microservices, many different potentially containers. How are they all connected? How are they all dependent on each other? But there's also this other component to cloud native that called cardinality that really drives a massive amount of complexity in environments. So one of the things we specifically asked in the survey is, like, are you struggling with complexity and cardinality, and by what degree? And what we found was, when we broke out the top quartile and the bottom quartile of cloud native adopters, there was a really big difference in how they viewed a problem like cardinality. So the companies that are far along on their cloud native journey, they've been there, done that, like they're pretty advanced. More than half of them said that cardinality and complexity is a huge issue in observability, compared to the bottom quartile, where it was a little more than a third. So what I ask you to take away from this is, if you are, earlier in your cloud native journey and still trying to, figure out what kind of pitfalls you might be facing down the line, know that those of you who are a little bit further ahead are facing this major issue with cardinality. So I should probably explain what cardinality actually means, because I've used this word about 15 times in the past 60 seconds. It's really a math nerd term. I say nerd lovingly, trust me. And it describes the possible unique combinations that you can achieve in a data set. So here's how I would explain this to my 5-year-old, although he's not here, he's at school. If I have 20 lollipops and Karan has 20 lollipops, right? We both have 20 lollipops. Great, that's the same. But if mine come in 5 flavors and 3 sizes, then my cardinality or unique combinations are 15, right? I could have a medium cherry or a small lemon or a large grape. There's 15 possible combinations I could have. But if Karan's 20 lollipops only come in 5 flavors, his cardinality is only 5. We have the same number of lollipops, but mine have a lot more complexity and cardinality than Karan's, not to brag. So why should you care about this? In a metrics world, in every one of these different combinations, instead of flavors and size combinations, it's data streams, it's time streams. So let's say you have one engineer who decides to add UUID or pod ID to their metrics. All of a sudden, your cardinality has just exploded. And once again, why do you care? What's so bad about this? Well, you can't find what you need. It's very, very expensive, and it really slows everything down. And of course, it's not, cardinality is very much like, I think about it as like Goldilocks. It's not too much is bad, too little is also bad. And I know, Karan, you've got some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. If I had 9 regions and there were 3 availability zones in each region. And if there's one service deployed across 3 AZs and 9 regions, that's 27 instances of the service. So what we typically do is, and because there are hundreds of such microservices, what we typically do is let's collect all the data which we can across all of these places, and we have the data. And when we have the data, we'll be able to troubleshoot effectively. And the problem is that not all the data for all the services or all the pods and containers is useful. So sucking in all the data makes it useless. And if we can develop that muscle of spending the time, even during ingestion, to shape and curate the data and keep what is valuable, that's the important part. That's where, according to the previous slide, that's where our alerts become more useful, our curated runbooks become more useful. So the whole system has to come together, right, from ingestion to production monitoring.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the hard part becomes figuring out, how do I know what's useful and what's not, right? That's obviously the $1 million question. But this is really the crux of why I think this is the root cause of why observability is so much more challenging in a cloud native world. And so we did, one of the other survey questions that we asked was, like, what are your top complaints about your current observability solution? And we also wanted to hear from the audience as well. So if we could push the next poll, and folks could take a second to vote on what is your single top complaint about your current solution. While you take a minute to do that, we will walk you through what we found in the survey. So first of all, one thing that I found very interesting, and I guess maybe not surprising, but 0% of leaders had complaints about observability, but 100% of individual contributors had at least one complaint. Not shocking, right? Because the individual contributors are the ones who are, in the tooling day in and day out. But the leaders, I think, need to spend a little bit more time to understand what what the challenges that their people are facing. So you can see in ascending order, the 38% said tool is too slow, right? Once again, coming back to the on-call situation, if it's the middle of the night, you've just been woken up by a page and you're trying to load your tool and it's really slow, it's incredibly frustrating. It's you're losing time, you're losing sleep. This makes sense that this is the top complaint. 45% say it takes a lot of manual time and labor. And I think this comes mostly into like the care and feeding and maintenance of the observability solution to make sure it's continuously up to date, but also likely to, build dashboards, build alerts, get the information out that you need. It's just too time intensive. 46% said too much data. So this comes back to exactly what we were just talking about, and that more data is not always more better, right? You can't find what you need. That's not helpful. And then 62% said that their companies were actively looking for ways to reduce observability costs.
And if you look at the slide, this is all about cardinality. You are slow dashboards because too much data, a lot of time and labor, and obviously 46% is too much data. And because of too much data, you have too much costs. It costs to ingest, it costs to store, it costs to query and retrieve the information. And it's almost like a paradox. It's almost like you wanted to build context and you got all the data, but you actually are lost. There is no context. It's actually meaningless context. It doesn't mean anything. All this data doesn't mean anything because I can't make head or tails or sense out of the data itself.
Yeah, I like that. Meaningless context. It is a paradox, that's for sure. So really interesting results here. It's really spread across the board, which to me just speaks to the fact that there's so many different unique challenges that people are facing in observability. I'll call out the top responses here. Looks like the 24% you said, I get alerts that don't give me enough context to understand and triage the issue. Wow. Okay. Well, that was literally exactly what we were just talking about. Really common challenge that we can fix with better process, better tooling, right? It's a lot of this stuff is like, there's no tool that can magically fix all of these problems. There's tools that can help give you more context and help make it easier and more natural to add the context. But a lot of this just has to become an organizational muscle. Let's see, then the second most common one looks like it was, I frequently get paged after hours for alerts that are urgent. So more alerting challenges. And that makes sense. No one likes that. And we need to figure out a way to get better triaging on that. And then tied for third place is the tool slow to load dashboards and queries, and customers report incidents before we know about the issues. Wow. So yeah, really interesting here. It's a little bit different than what we got from the survey, but to me, that just speaks to the fact, like I said, there's a lot of different challenges that people are facing with observability. I'm making you pick your number one. You might be like, oh, but my number two challenge is right up there too. Thank you for answering this very, very interesting data. All right. Let's move into the last section, which is talking about the benefits of best-in-class observability. So if you're on your cloud native journey and you're trying to figure out, like, are things going right? Are they not going right? One of the common trends we found is that observability is really a baseline to help improve many different components of your cloud native stack. And this is not a controversial statement, right? Pretty much everyone agrees that observability is critical for success in cloud native. And you can see, 87% say observability is essential to success. 71% say my business can't innovate effectively without good observability. The promise of cloud native is speed and time to value. So if your system is broken all the time, you're never going to get to that speed promise. So it makes sense that there is this tight linkage.
Yeah, it's like a bird which can't fly. It's supposed to fly fast, but it can't fly. You put in all the cloud native stuff to move fast, but you can't.
Yeah, so cloud native without observability is like a bird who can't fly. That's an ostrich. Ostriches are birds that can't fly. They run really fast on land, but they're never going to be able to leap over that chasm, right? They're never going to be able to get over to the next stage. There's a good analogy for you. So if you are trying to do cloud native and you don't have a strong observability strategy, or you're trying to take your legacy observability or monitoring with you from the old world to the new, you're acting like an ostrich. I like it. So yeah, if everyone agrees that observability is critical for cloud native success, I'm just very disappointed and disheartened to see that we're not great at it. That 99% of organizations are missing their MTTR. In this case, we specifically asked mean time to repair. Karan, why is everyone missing their MTTR?
I think the way we approach MTTR or observability, we make it a very tech-driven versus a problem-driven thing. If you see how Google actually came up with Dapper or Census around tracing, they had a real problem. There were thousands or hundreds of thousands of containers, and they wanted to make sure they could trace through all those containers. So there was a problem-centric approach to solving that for themselves. We have gotten to this whole notion of 3 pillars or 6 pillars, and we have, we try to check boxes with, hey, we have metrics, we have logs, we have traces, and if we have all 3, then we are done. Well, if that's the case, then why don't we just buy disparate tools? And then once we buy them, we buy one for logs, one for metrics, one for traces. The problem still is the same. When we are on call, nothing ties anything together. And we have to jump from tool to tool to tool. And that wastes a lot of time. And that also increases a lot of your learnings you have to do across these tools. So one of the big things is, yes, you can treat it as a tech problem, but the main thing is, what is the main problem for your application, for your business, which you're trying to solve? And every company is unique. Their business solutions are unique. They'll have to have a way to bring it into a more problem-centric approach versus a tech-driven approach.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. It's, it's not box checking, right? Like, let me take your order, a log, a metric, a trace. Like, it needs to be about problem solving. I think that's definitely a big part of it. The other thing too, that's a hot button issue for me is nobody knows what MTTR means. Is it mean time to remediate, mean time to restore, mean time to repair, mean time to Rachel? Like, okay, I don't think it's that last one, but like, we don't have a standard definition of this. We also don't know, like, when do you start the clock on MTTR? Like, is it from the moment the issue actually happens, or is it from the moment that the alert fires, or the moment that you know about it, or the moment that the customer reports it? There's that. And then the other bigger issue is that means, averages are not that helpful. They don't show you the outliers. In fact, most people are, they're looking at P99s and not looking at means for most metrics. So, it does seem like, yes, there is we are struggling with MTTR, but it's both the concept and how we approach it are not working well for us. And I meant to say at the start too, the way that we got the methodology behind this number, because I know you might be thinking this sounds like a marketer made it up, and I have to admit it does a little bit. But the way we got to this data point was, we asked every respondent in the survey, 500 respondents, we asked them what their actual mean time to repair was, what their actual was. Then we asked those same people what their target mean time to repair was. So then we looked at it, and 99% of people were not only 1% met or exceeded their target. So it was all self-consistent within the same organization. So I'm going to show you the raw numbers in a second, because you're probably wondering, like, is my MTTR good or is it bad? And the answer, I can't really give you an answer, because I think it needs to be consistent with your own organization. You set your own targets, and then you try and meet and exceed your own targets. But unfortunately, we're not right now. And so we found that the one trend, and I cut this data all different kinds of ways by company sizes and industries and use of cloud native. And the main factor that we found that impacted this stat was actually what kind of observability tool they used. So actually, it'd be great to push the last poll while we talk about this. We found that in terms of the MTTR hours, like the actual average hours, the big gap is based on the tools that people are using. No one's meeting their targets, but companies that use vendors for observability had lower actual and lower target MTTRs, you can see. So I guess, Karan, talk to me a little bit, because you've been there. Why do you think this gap exists?
I think one reality is that it's the same number of people you have, and they have a set of skills. So I'll give you an example. I was making infrastructure for internal developers. Basically, I was a product manager. And we went with the approach of, hey, let's take open source solutions and let's build our own in-house. For a certain aspect, for logs, we had a vendor-driven solution, but for metrics-driven observability, we built it in-house. And you can't scale that. It's impossible to scale. It's again leads to the disconnected problem that I have one solution for logs and one for metrics and another one and tracing. We didn't even get to that, because we were just so consumed with those 27 people to build in this internal observability, apart from taking care of the infrastructure and taking care of interrupt-driven requests and so on and so forth. So it doesn't work out. In the end, you can't just hire fast enough, or you don't have the budgets. So you can just go as far with the inbuilt OSS. And I'm an OSS proponent. I've been an Apache committer for over a decade. So I love OSS. And that's how we took the first approach, but it just doesn't scale.
Yeah, that's very consistent with what I've seen from the customers and end users I work with as well, in that, there's a lot of great reasons to go open source. I mean, just having that future-proof, no lock-in, is so important, especially I think today. But it doesn't scale in a lot of organizations. And so, okay, we just got the poll results back. And this is, all right, it looks like 56% of you are using a mix of both, a mix of vendor tools and in-house. That makes a lot of sense. That's very, very common. And it might be between different teams or applications or departments, or it might be for different use cases, or might be just that observability is really, really broad. And you might need a lot of different tools to do all the things you need to do. And then about 28% of you are vendor tools only, and then 16% of you are in-house tools only. So this, once again, this might be helpful for you as a benchmark. It might not be. MTTR is one of those things that is, it's impossible to define what's good with your peers unless you make sure you're using the exact same methodology. So I almost hesitate to even show the raw numbers here, because I think what's more important and interesting is the gap. And you will see that for vendor observability and in-house observability, that gap, that percentage miss is actually just almost exactly the same. It's 1 or 2 percentage points apart. Just an interesting one. And like I said, MTTR is maybe not even the best thing to be measuring anyways, but it is one yardstick that we can use to understand how we're doing against our own expectations and requirements. All right, so just going to take a few minutes to wrap up, and then we will have time for your questions. So coming back to the beginning, I think if the 3 things you take away from this are, 1, observability needs embedded context, right? Without that context, people are going to be running around like firefighting and not being able to accomplish what they need to. It's going to lengthen MTTR, it's going to lengthen MTTD, which then are MTTR. And so one of the ways you can get to a better place here is if you treat every team like a customer, and every team is every other team's customer, and you put in with all the assumptions that, wow, if I was writing this for a customer, I wouldn't assume that they knew X, Y, and Z. I wouldn't assume that they would know where to find A, B, and C. And so taking a little bit of extra time up front to add the context that you need will go a really long way. The second one is that cloud native drives increased complexity. I don't think that's a controversial statement, but if you're not careful, right, you can get stuck in this paradox of meaningless context, in this, more data is not more better. Like if you have so much context, that's actually in some ways, I'd say worse than no context. So it's another Goldilocks situation where you need to find a way to narrow it down to just what's relevant. And there's different tools and capabilities in a modern solution that can help you with this. And then the last one is that we're adopting cloud native, we're going cloud native because we want to go faster, right? We need speed, we need scale, we need agility. But if you're not simultaneously investing in observability, you're going to struggle to recognize some of these benefits. And so, you might end up being that flightless bird, that ostrich, right? Where, yes, you're a bird, yes, you can go fast, but it's not going to get you from A to B where you need to be. Any additional comments on this, Karan?
Yeah, I'd say that a lot of organizations are also in the POC phase of adopting cloud native. And it's okay to adopt OSS to begin with. It's a good start. It's a rapid way to go and complete the solution, complete your stack. Just keep in mind that there are some process changes you'll have to make. You'll have to spend more time on the curation and treating other teams as customers, and that should reflect in your alerts. And you also have to be, if you're looking at the longer term, just keep in mind that your region, you're in one region today, you might be in multiple regions tomorrow. And would your current solution in the POC phase scale to that? And what are your plans for something like that? So just keep a couple of those things in mind. I think you should be good.
Yeah, that's good advice. Thank you, Karan. And with that, we would love to turn it over to you and take your questions. So I think you can head on over to the Q&A box, type in your question, and we would love to answer them.
Great, thank you, Rachel and Karan. So we have some questions coming in. Then the first one, do you have examples of the companies who have gone from self-manager to vendor observability? And how did that impact their outcomes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and like we saw from the poll a minute ago, it's not necessarily like an all or nothing. Like most people are using a combination of self-managed, open source, and vendors. But I do have two examples from our customer base, people I've gotten an opportunity to work with that have had really interesting journeys. The first one is Robinhood, the trading, financial services trading platform. They were previously using in-house managed Grafana and Prometheus and Mimer. I think they had some support as well, but it was all in-house run. And they were really struggling on a number of fronts. I mean, cost actually was very, very high for them to run this in-house. They're also struggling with availability. You can imagine the kind of industry that they're in. They really, really need highly available services and solutions themselves, and thus they need highly available observability. And that plus like how long their MTTR and MTTD was really drove them to look for a vendor solution, which spoiler alert, it was Chronosphere. But I'm not going to give a full advertisement for Chronosphere, but more say really great outcome for them. For example, they were able to improve their mean time to detect by 4x. They dashboards that used to take 15 plus minutes to load now load in seconds. They've also now have a really highly available environment, which they could not have that on their own. I think they're in single nines of availability. Now they get 4 nines of availability. So a lot of benefit for them. That's a good example of a larger scale organization. A smaller scale one though, like if you're like, I'm not Robinhood size, I'm a little smaller than that. A company that's not a household name, but really up and coming SaaS vendor called Abnormal Security. They were running Prometheus themselves in-house. They were trying to scale a single Prometheus instance. It got a bit hairy as they grew. And coming on board with Chronosphere, they reduced their mean time to detect by 80%. So it is now 1 minute. Dashboard loads less than a minute. Everything is just the performance for them is a lot better, as is the availability as well. So two just examples, one big, one small. We see this all the time though, companies, they start out with open source, like Karan said. It's a great place to start. It's where we recommend you starting with Prometheus and open telemetry and Grafana for dashboards. But it only can take you so far in a lot of cases. And Karan, I think you've experienced this firsthand as well in the past, like going from self-managed to vendor.
Yeah. And this was, I mean, in the end, the crux was I took Kubernetes and I went to manage Kubernetes. I took Kafka, went to manage Kafka. We started with so there was a monolith which we had to break down to microservices. We couldn't do that. So we started something in parallel product, which was purely microservices based. So for a start, for us, it was good to take Prometheus and Grafana and put that together and at least have some metrics-based observability. Took all the on-prem logging solution, moved that to a more SaaS-based solution. The general theme there was, with the limited team, the best thing to do was any rolling upgrades, restart, security patches, etc., and the management aspect was being offloaded. And I think that was a good thing because the team could reskill themselves and focus on the things and the problems that actually mattered.
Good example.
Yeah, great. Okay, we have the other question. And I think this one is more for the Karan. You talk a lot about putting context into observability tooling. Where should that context come from?
So the context, obviously, people have context and people build services and they know things about their services. The problem happens where there is no one place to put that context. I either have a Confluence page which quickly grows stale, or but there's no other place because my tooling is very different. My logs are sitting somewhere else. My metrics are sitting somewhere else. So where does one go? So one good place is to have a process in place and agree upon where that one single place is, and that has to be live, that has to be kept updated. The place I recommend generally is have a tool which like a dashboard. When you get an alert, you click on something, you go to a dashboard, you start to analyze stuff. You should have all the context there. All your runbook should be there. All your troubleshooting guides should be there. All the SMEs who are responsible for that service should be there. All the dependent service map should be there. All of that stuff and related alerts should be there. So build a curated path for people from where they are in a single place. Don't make them jump into different places, and get them to resolve the alert really fast. And then you can repair that later on. And that's where you can dive into a specific tool to work on the repair job.
Okay, we have addressed the most of the questions, so we are going to wrap up the Q&A at this point. I did mention at the beginning that we are giving away t-shirts to the first 100 guests who register and attend the webinar. So for those who are qualified for the offer, you will get the email with instructions for claiming your t-shirt after the webinar. And Rachel and Karen, any parting word or anything you'd like the audience to know before we close out?
No, only last thing from me is thank you so much for being here. Hopefully this has been a helpful and interesting conversation for you. And I'd love to continue the conversation out in the, webverse, out in the world. So, please reach out if you want to talk any more about these. You can tweet at me on Twitter at Rachel Dines. I'm also on Mastodon, Rachel at Hachyderm. And would love to just continue this conversation with you all and really appreciate you attending today.